I'm not a complicated man. I like cinema.
Spent that whole summer with me in my room watching movies every day.
I love the movies.
I love the movies.
I love the movies.
Welcome
to
the house
of 1,000 movies.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of House of 1,000 Movies. I'm your host, Jeff Rauseo, and today I've got Elliot Coen with me. Elliot, thanks for joining.
Oh, my absolute pleasure.
Yeah, you were. We did an episode of my last podcast, which was fun, and so this will be a little bit different because we're just going to talk about. This is one of your top 4 movies, right?
It is, yeah, all-time favorite. Yeah,
so I put it up to you. I said, "Hey, give me your list," and I think this is a great pick. So today we're talking Vertigo, all-time favorite. But before we get started on that, a little bit about yourself. Where can people find you? What do you do? How'd you get started in this? What do people know you for?
So you can find me on YouTube, as many people will find you as well. I talk about all things Blu-rays, particularly boutique Blu-rays. So the kind of boutique labels like Criterion, Arrow, etc. And yeah, just talk about all things in cinema. You know, classic films, cult films, big blockbuster releases. And yeah, so I review those, and I also have an Instagram page where I post some random pictures of Blu-rays.
Don't we all?
Yeah, and that's basically all I do in life. Literally just that.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. To me, that's a great life. Yeah, so I think that the channel name's still Boutique Blu-rays with Elliot Coen, right? If people want to check you out.
Yeah, it's still going strong with the boutique stuff.
Yep. Yeah. No, and serious, if you guys want to dive into, and you're over in the UK, so you cover actually a lot of stuff that I don't even really have access to when it comes to like Eureka, which I guess they're doing some more in the US now, which I'm excited about. But you cover a lot of stuff that's super interesting that I don't think a lot of people stateside necessarily see. So it's a good resource for me.
Yeah, I'm in a bit of a weird spot because my channel grew talking about Criterion releases that I imported. So I actually sort of have a split audience between the UK and the US. It is literally almost 50-50. So it's quite an interesting split.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're in a good spot because we are kind of like Arrow was always UK, and then Arrow came to the US. Criterion was US. Now they've come to the UK. I think the two of us across the pond here, they're finally making some effort to, and now Eureka coming over to the US. So, yeah, I'm very excited. But it's a good spot to be in, I think, because you're going to see a lot of those things merge.
Yeah.
All right, so Vertigo, 1958, Alfred Hitchcock, psychological thriller. You know, a movie that was, for me, I'll say, a blind spot till I think the 4K disc came out. I had never seen it. So this is, I've only seen it within the last, when did it come out? 3 or 4 years ago that I first watched it. But as always, we're going to talk a little bit here. Let's talk production, background on the film, and then that critical and audience reception, which I don't think people realize was not necessarily as great as it seems, considering where Vertigo is placed now amongst like top 100 films.
Yeah, definitely.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no. Go on. You go.
All right. So anyway, Hitchcock movie, right? Shot all on location in San Francisco, which I thought was a pretty cool aspect of this because you can really tell, like, we're not using set pieces here. Like, there's a lot of really beautiful shots in the city. They really went out and found these locations, which I thought was a really cool part of the background and production.
Yeah, definitely. And I particularly, talking about the 4K, which you just mentioned, when a film is shot outdoors and it's lit by natural sunlight, it can look beautiful. You can get so much detail out of it that on some of Hitchcock's more studio set-produced films, they kind of look a lot softer. The lighting is different. So you really do get these beautiful shots of the Golden Gate Bridge when he's like following around Kim Novak in the car, or the sloping streets of San Francisco. It's all beautiful stuff to look at.
Yeah, and this is like, I would say this is like pretty prime San Francisco time period too. This is like, it's not quite hippies yet and all that was going on there. It's not quite like the 80s and the 90s, not quite what it was today. Like it's really like prime. Like I think when people think San Francisco, it's like this time period, a really beautiful, like not super overpopulated yet, like a really beautiful area with lots of great landscapes, which is something I really liked about it. But they also, I'm looking at the background here. So Prince Technicolor film, which, you know, you talk about how gorgeous it looks. I think that definitely plays a part, right?
Definitely, because Hitchcock was known for making these striking black and white pictures. And it was in the 50s, the middle of the 50s, when he started making films like The Trouble with Harry and Vertigo. I mean, he'd experienced films in color with Rope at the end of the 40s, but it was really like mid 50s when he was getting to grasp with what you could do with color cinematography, because there's a lot, we'll talk about the analysis later, but there's a lot to do with the actual colors that are used in the film, like the greens and the reds, that you can kind of look at analytically. And I think he was aware of the use of color and how that can really help tell the story.
Yeah, and you can tell too, there's when it got brought to 4K and you can add that HDR color on top of the tech. I mean, those are my favorite movies to watch in any high definition format. It's a Technicolor movie. So, yeah. And then fun fact, I guess I usually save the fun facts for the end, but this is a little bit fun fact. This is a little bit like technical, but according to Wikipedia, and confirm or deny, but this is the first movie to ever use the dolly zoom. So really pioneered like a huge part of the way movies are shot.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the first use of dolly zoom at the start when he's looking down at the floor when he's hanging on to the building, and then later on in the tower when he's looking down to the floor of the tower. And obviously, you know, your favorite film, Jaws, uses the dolly zoom very effectively. And, you know, famously used in The Lord of the Rings in that particular early shot. So yeah, this was like the first time it was used as far as I know.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty, like you said, Jaws it's a pretty iconic thing now. And there's so many great moments that use that. And yeah, I mean, that's just Hitchcock and his team just innovating. But even with all this greatness that we talked about, I'm looking here, budget and box office and the critical response, $2.5 million budget. That's probably a pretty high tier for 1958. It's a decent budget. It only made about $7 million at the box office, and the critical response was kind of middle of the road. Any ideas kind of what led to that? Was it just ahead of its time? People just weren't ready for something like this?
Yeah, I think, you know, without sounding too pretentious or anything, it's a lot more psychological than the stuff he had made before. So I think a lot of the films that came before this were very much your typical thriller, with where the suspense is like first and foremost, you know, front and center. The suspense in this film isn't really, it's not suspense around murders or like danger as such. The suspense is different. You know, it is more psychological. So it's suspense in terms of like when he's following her in the car, and that scene just goes on for minutes where he's in the car following her around the roads. And I guess to audiences that wouldn't be seen as that interesting. You know, they wanted to see someone getting killed or strangled or, you know, something like that. And I think, yeah, it's taken time for people to get to grips with it. I think films that have been inspired by Vertigo have led people to go back to this and appreciate it for what it is. So yeah, it surprises me though that it didn't do that well, considering now it's considered one of the greatest films of all time. Because in 2012 it was voted the greatest film of all time by the Sight and Sound poll, which is like most of the great critics and directors, they'll they'll vote on what their favorite films are, and that was number one. So yeah, it really did take a real upturn over the decades to becoming one of the greatest films.
Yeah, I was surprised when looking into it because, I'm just doing research for this on the background, and I was like, but I mean, it's 1950. It wasn't like Hitchcock was new or had been on kind of a rough run or anything. Like, he was just, I guess, pushing the envelope and just doing things nobody had seen before, which again, like 2 years later, he does with Psycho. But I think that had a much better response, although controversial in its own way, the way people responded to it. But like critically, it was a lot better response than Vertigo, which, they're only 2 years removed. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, something that was very important, I don't know if you know much about this history, but in the 60s, Hitchcock sat down and had lengthy interviews with Francois Truffaut, who's the great French filmmaker, and he started off as a critic. And they recorded hours and hours of interviews. And there was a book which was produced based off these transcripts. And it was the French critics that really sort of adopted Hitchcock and analysed his films. Because at the time before that, Hitchcock was basically just seen as like a genre director. He just made a certain type of film. People didn't analyse his films. They weren't elevated to anything else. He wasn't considered one of the greatest filmmakers at the time. And it was really because of what the French did in the 60s, sort of spreading the great word about his films. Because in the 60s, after Psycho, he had some trouble making films, and some people say he never recovered after that. They think his later portion of films just weren't as good. So yeah, it was the French that really kind of, championed his films.
Interesting. No, I didn't. See, that's the thing. I need to dive more into Hitchcock. I know the movies, but I know there's this bigger history. In fact, I think even Vertigo is based on a French novel, isn't it? So there's kind of a connection there that he was looking ahead. He was moving a little bit faster than maybe the American audiences are ready for.
Yeah. Yeah, it was based on a French novel. I'll just speak about briefly. There's another great film called Diabolique, which is in the Criterion collection. I actually pulled it off the shelf here. I've got the disc here.
Great.
This is based off a novel from the same author who wrote the book that Vertigo is based on. And Hitchcock originally wanted the rights to this, but then Clouseau got the rights first and made the film. So this could have been another Hitchcock film, sort of like Vertigo, but it never was.
That makes a lot of sense, though. Yeah, you can definitely, knowing they were written by the same person makes a lot of sense. They're, definitely. It almost feels like it really was like 20 or 30 years ahead of, some of these great thrillers that you got in the 70s and 80s are sort of, they really were so ahead of the game here, which tends to happen a lot. It seems to be the case. Some of our greatest movies are ones that like we look back on 20 years later and go, oh, wait, that was really good. And nobody thought so at the time.
And that always makes me think about the films that are coming out today. What are we going to think of these, decades down the line? Because like an example, The Shining
for sure.
from Kubrick was never considered a great film on release. And over decades, The Shining, grew to be what it is today. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I do. I kind of do the same thing. I'm always like, what's going to be that next cult classic? And now critics like to label everything as like the next cult classic. You see it on posters all the time and in reviews, but like truly what will get picked up in 20 years by a new generation who just discovers they love some $2 million movie that did nothing. It's kind of exciting. I mean, I'm excited to discover more stuff as I get older and a younger generation tells me, hey, you old people, this was good. You should watch this. So cast and crew. Obviously we've talked Hitchcock directed. You've got James Stewart and Kim Novak. I mean, that's who I know from the crew, the cast. Anything else you want to call out being the big Vertigo fan? Anybody you wanted to highlight?
Well, there's actually not much of a cast in the film. There's only
Right.
a few actors, really, because the film is dealing with these central performances. Barbara Bel Geddes plays like a kind of secondary supporting role in it. She's very much seen as like the mother figure in the story. And she was in quite a few films at the time, but she was never like a humongous actress that people would know just based off her name. And I think Kim Novak as well, to some extent. I think she was very big when this film came out. But I feel like if you asked most people today, would they know who Kim Novak is? People, our sort of age, probably wouldn't know her.
Yeah. No, to be honest, I don't think I could have named something she was in before I saw Vertigo. Yeah, not one that was on my radar from that time period for sure.
Yeah. James Stewart and Kim Novak were actually in another film together the same year called Bell, Book and Candle, which is nowhere near as popular. But it's just interesting they were both. Maybe it was like a contract deal, a studio deal or something, but
right.
they were in another film the same year.
They used to do that so often. Yeah, where it was like, well, he's got one left on his contract, so let's bang this one out with Kim Novak, who's also got one left. That seemed to be a really common thing that doesn't happen now. Now you're tied into like franchises, I guess, which are tied to studios, but it's like, hey, Robert Downey Jr.'s got 8 appearances as Iron Man, and he's got to fulfill them all. It's kind of crazy how it's changed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was looking into. So the music, Vertigo, Bernard Herrmann was the composer. Looking at his credits, pretty incredible. Lot of work with Hitchcock, North by Northwest, The Birds, Psycho, Marnie, but looks like he also worked with Francois Truffaut as well, which is interesting that we already made that connection, but they worked very closely. So. Yeah, quite the pedigree there for music. Of course, I mean Hitchcock's movies, the music is always top notch.
And famously based off of Hitchcock's movies, Scorsese was a big fan and managed to get him to do the music for Taxi Driver, which I think was maybe his final score that he ever did before he passed away.
It was, yeah. According to what I'm looking at here, right before his death, he did Taxi Driver. So, yeah, you can see that influence from one great to another, and Scorsese's obviously watching Hitchcock and then wanting to kind of replicate some of that. And yeah, that was he died Christmas Eve, 1975. So I think he died even before it came out. It was kind of his last hurrah. So yeah, great music. And then I just noted the cinematographer. I don't know the name, Robert Burks, but doing a little research, Academy Award winner for To Catch a Thief, which, so obviously another collaborator with Hitchcock. Looked like he worked on The Spirit of St. Louis, The Music Man, a couple of other films that are kind of notable, but looks like this one and To Catch a Thief are kind of his two big ones. He was definitely a Hitchcock collaborator.
Yeah, Hitchcock was famous for when he found someone that he liked working with, he kind of stuck with them for as many projects as possible. Just going briefly back to Bernard Herrmann, they actually famously fell out after they made Marnie because there was some kind of dispute on the music. And after Marnie, they never worked again for the rest of Hitchcock's career.
Oh.
Yeah, some bad blood after Marnie, apparently.
I guess so. Yeah, that's kind of because he was around for another 10 years or so after Marnie. But it's interesting you mentioned that they kind of stick around. One of the things here that it mentions is that Robert Burks, cinematographer, actually was he left Warner Brothers with Hitchcock in the early 50s to go with him to Paramount. So even though he had this great gig with Warner, he followed the director versus sticking with the studio. Smartly, I guess, because 2 years later he won the Academy Award for cinematography with Hitchcock on To Catch a Thief. So it worked out for him. But yeah, he did. It's kind of funny. These guys, they died kind of young. Herman died at 64. Burks died at 58. So they did, they squeezed in what they could in a short time, but I wonder how much more they could have done being so young. I mean, look at John Williams it's like into his 80s now and still cranking stuff out. That's great.
Yeah, it's insane.
So yeah, as you mentioned, kind of a short cast, right? I only see like maybe 8 to 10 people actually credited. And then of course Hitchcock has his cameo, in this one, which is famous. Always got to look out for those. He's like Tarantino and, M. Night Shyamalan in that way. He's going to pop up and everything, which is always fun to look out for. His are pretty obvious though. That silhouette is pretty, that's a pretty dead giveaway when you see Hitchcock.
Yeah, it is, definitely. We didn't mention James Stewart. Well, we kind of brushed past him, but it was a very different
We did
role.
brush past him. We should talk about him.
Yeah.
He's kind of a big deal.
He was often seen in many films as like a hero. You know, he was in a lot of Westerns. He was in some other Hitchcock movies, but he was like the good guy, the all-American hero. And this was quite a different turn for him because he is still the hero of the story, but it goes to some very dark places. You know, he is a guy that's obsessed, and his character goes to some quite scary places that I think audiences weren't expecting from him.
Yeah, no, looking at his film, I mean, he's a big Capra guy, but people think, you know, It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the Philadelphia Story, You Can't Take It With You. Like, yeah, very much making that kind of film. And it's interesting, he did Vertigo, and then a year later, Anatomy of a Murder. So really kind of shifted a bit from what he was known for. Even going back to, well, he did a lot with Hitchcock, obviously. So he had Rear Window and Rope and The Man Who Knew Too Much. Again, another frequent collaborator. Tends to be the case with these guys, a Scorsese, a Tarantino, or, you know, these great filmmakers. The same people show up again and again. It's like, I guess, why mess with success? But yeah, it's a good point. This is kind of out of character for him a bit in Vertigo.
And maybe that contributed to why audiences didn't click with it at the time, because
right.
they didn't like
I was going to ask, do you think it's just, right, you see James Stewart and you're expecting a certain something, and that's not what you get with Vertigo. It's a totally different vibe from James Stewart that, you know, all these audiences in the 40s and the 50s would have expected. So there's our cast and our crew. A little bit in the background. Not a super popular movie, but with very popular names behind it. Even just having James Stewart was A-list stuff at that point in time. So let's ask you, forget the critics from the 50s. They were wrong. Why do you love this movie so much? What is it about it? You know, what's your kind of analysis? What makes it so great?
Well, first of all, this film in particular I find so rewatchable, and I don't know why compared to other films, but this is one that I can watch again and again. And it might be the film that I've seen the most. Yeah, even Barry Lyndon, which is my favorite film, I haven't seen as many times as Vertigo. When I saw it for the first time years and years ago, honestly, it didn't click with me. And this is quite common with me. I'll watch a film for the first time, and maybe because it's hyped up, you start expecting a certain thing, you start looking for something amazing. And I remember liking it, but it didn't hit me. And then sometime later, I decided to rewatch it, and it was like, it all clicked on the second viewing. Also, like on a personal level, when I was on the first date with my now wife, we started talking about Hitchcock on the first date, it blew my mind because in my dating history, I'd never found anyone with a remotely interesting film taste. And here I was talking about Hitchcock and how she had studied it at college in film studies and going into weird Hitchcock analysis on the first date. And that's not why I've married her, by the way. She does have other good qualities.
No, but you knew, though. You knew. You were like, oh, this is the one.
Yeah. So on a personal level, it's just a film we love rewatching. And I rewatched it last night, and she joined me watching it. So, yeah, it's just a very personal film.
I tend to find like that the same reason I end up liking having things in my, top 4, top 5 is a lot of it does come down to the connections you have to make too. It's not just whether like my whole reasoning for Jaws is, it's a great movie. Like I think objectively, but there's also that deeper connection of like growing up in that area where it was shot and being down there for summers and watching it on the Cape and then going to the beach after I watched it and just for some reason being unfazed by sharks, but still like that connection. I'm going to watch this and then I'm going to go to the beaches in the water where they filmed it. And like, there was something really cool about that as a kid. And I have a lot of those same kind of, that personal connection seems to, it's always going to be a great movie, but there are some that are also guilty pleasures that I'm like, this doesn't deserve to even be on a top 100 list, but it's on my top 10 because there's that personal level. That's what's so great about movies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But you had mentioned the colors too. So I want to get into, so you mentioned the kind of the use of colors and Technicolor being very important to this. I mean, what is your take on that? I'm super interested.
So we didn't actually talk about Saul Bass, who did the iconic poster. And there's also a scene in the middle of the film where there's like, it's almost like animation in a way. There's a use of like interesting graphics. And that's iconic. The kind of red-orange poster. And the film uses color to kind of represent, I think, different emotions and different headspaces. A lot of green is used when Jimmy Stewart's character realizes that Kim Novak is playing the part later in the film. And I think green is sort of used to represent envy and, obsession. The film is all about obsession. So I think on a subconscious level, the colors really help that because, amping up the colors is a way of telling the story. And when you watch Vertigo, this is not a realistic film. This isn't realism. You don't watch it thinking this actually happened. It is very stylized.
Right.
And it's something that, you go forward to like Dario Argento in Italy and Mario Bava. They used tons of these lurid colors to kind of get emotions across. And I think that's what we see here in Vertigo.
Yeah. Sometimes they even name the movies after a color like deep red and just go, hey, this movie's going to be called, this is about a very deep red. Like, you can, but you're right. Those guys, their use of color is, I mean, that's another reason why I collect their movies and want to watch them in these 4K best formats because they're just stunning. Like when I watched Suspiria for the first time on a new 4K mastering, it's like, there's nothing like this being made now, never mind then. Like it just blows you away. But yeah, it's interesting. I guess I never made the connection to like the color in this film.
Yeah, because sometimes in modern films, you do see very strong colors like this, but they're almost not for any reason. It's like a way of making cinematography interesting for the sake of it. Whereas I think when it's done well and it actually is telling the story and getting emotions across, that's when color is used best.
Yeah, and I'm usually drawn, like I feel like I'm a little burnt out on the gray, black, I guess the DC comics type look, but also, I love Denis Villeneuve, but he also has a certain look to his movies too, which I can respect and I appreciate for what they are. But when something does come across that, like, that's why I love these Technicolor movies, because I'm like, the world is a can be a colorful place. Like not everything has to be so depressing. Maybe we just live in a depressing time and it's a reflection of that, but like it can be more colorful. And there are some movies that do that really well, like you said. And like, I guess La La Land comes to mind right away of just like, there's color everywhere. And I loved, that was just so much fun to watch compared to some stuff that's maybe a little depressing to watch. Still great movies, but yeah, there's just like, there's been that trend lately, which is why I'm always drawn to these Technicolor movies. But I think at one point there's a green dress or jacket or at some point in the film, right? That is kind of prominent. Like that's the outfit.
Yeah. So early on in the film, when he first is told to follow her to meet her, he's in the restaurant, and the restaurant has these very bright red walls, and everyone in the restaurant is in like a kind of grey or brown costume, except her. She's in this green dress, and the green amongst the red background and the grey is meant to really stand out. So yeah, you're right. The green there is used very well, and it kind of it mirrors later on when he's picking out the suit for her. He picks out a grey suit, but she's amongst the green background, so it's like she's flipped, and it's his obsession. So yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, no, I definitely like it struck me at the beginning, just that how vibrant she was against everything else, but I wasn't even thinking at the end. Yeah, everything is that flip is interesting. See, this is why I like talking to people about movies. You just catch like, I didn't even catch that the first time, but you're so right. It's a total flip of like, and I mean, I guess this is kind of a Hitchcock trademark, right? But we of course have the twist ending, which I think, before everybody was M. Night Shyamalan and his twist endings. I mean, it was Hitchcock doing that first. And this one, I remember the first time watching it because it was fairly recent. I mean, I was watching it with my wife. I mean, it got us. I'm glad I didn't read into this and have it spoiled, even though it's a 70-year-old movie at this point, because it was really, really effective. And he does that so well. Yeah.
Yeah, the twist is really good. And it's interesting because even if you know the twist is coming, if you've seen the film already, it's so effective, the build up. My favorite sequence in the film is when he has the nightmare and there's that really nightmarish music, and he sees the woman from the painting at the window, and he's walking towards her, but he's not moving, and he's against the black background and all this. I still find that sequence very chilling, even though it's not a horror film. It really does kind of get the nightmare across. But yeah, you're right. The twist and the storytelling, I think it's like icing on the cake for me. The twist, even without it and without the story, the way Hitchcock is able to make me feel through different scenes is what I love and keep coming back for.
Yeah, and it's such a fine line between like doing that really poorly and having it just be a gimmick, which, mentioning M. Night, I think he kind of got sucked into that where it like had to become a gimmick that there has to be a twist. And then it didn't work because you didn't focus story first. You almost worked from like the twist backwards. What's my twist going to be? Now I'll write the movie. And yeah, I feel the same way. I've seen Psycho many more times, but I feel the same way about every time Norman Bates busts through that door as Mother with the outfit on. And like the first time I saw it, it literally made me jump. It's actually scared me. I'm like, I'm watching this old black and white movie, didn't expect something to get me that good. And it still gets me every time, which is just like, yeah, you've won. If you're getting a 31-year-old 65 years after a movie came out to still jump every time that happens, like you're the expert. So yeah, I feel the same way. It's just everything is so well executed. It's not about the twist, but the twist just is like the cherry on top.
Yeah, and I think on that point, there's the story and there's the way the story is told. And I think people, say I was to say to someone today that Hitchcock is one of the greatest filmmakers ever, they might go and watch a film and just take in the story and the story beats. And it's really what's happening a layer above that I think is what Hitchcock is really good at. He's able to really tell the story well, but there's like something in the DNA of each one of these films. And I know that sounds really pretentious, but there's like something I can't describe that is working within the structure of the film that is just so brilliant. Yeah.
No, I get what you're saying. It does. Hey, this is people are listening to two guys talk about a movie we love. It can be pretentious. That's what this is.
Yeah. And
right?
also
but no, I get what you're saying though.
I was going to say also me saying that Hitchcock is one of the greatest isn't that much of a wild statement.
It's not.
People have said that before.
No. Yeah, no. Nothing you said is crazy. But you're right. There's almost like something happening that's bigger than just the movie. It's there's some magic that's like that movie magic that's just there that certain people have and certain people don't, and you feel differently when watching a movie by a Hitchcock.
Because just touching on that just for a brief minute, the French filmmaker Chris Marker, he made these films. I've got them here actually. They're called La Jetée and Sans Soleil, and he famously said, I've got a quote here, that Vertigo is the only film ever capable of portraying impossible memory. So he sees Vertigo as like, the best way of showing how memory works. And these films, these are great. La Jetée famously is what Terry Gilliam based 12 Monkeys on. And in 12 Monkeys, Vertigo plays at the end. So there's like a kind of loop back to Vertigo through these films. That's a whole other rabbit hole to go down, though. But there's
that's wild.
There's these weird theories looking at Vertigo as like a time travel movie. The bit where they go into the forest and they see the tree that has been sliced, and you can see all the moments in history within the bark of the tree. And just as a way of like memory and how he is trying to go back in time to get the woman that he loved and recreate her. So all this kind of memory and time, I think that's one of the reasons why this film has such great staying power.
Yeah, it's you know what, in movies like that, a lot of times too, they have a difficult time with audiences right away, and then they kind of find their legs because people need to see it 2, 3, 4 times before you fully appreciate it and get what's happening. And I think of a movie like a Memento or Predestination or other movies or Primer that play really well with time and that kind of that loop. And none of those were big hits. They have now become that cult classic, I guess, that we talked about. But it's almost too much to just like sit in a movie theater once and then leave and just have your mind blown and not be able to like watch it again the next day. You almost need that.
Yeah. And it's easy to forget that Vertigo was almost lost in a way after not being critically well received. It was redistributed theatrically in the 80s, and they used the film negative, but it had been treated so poorly that the colours had started to fade, and there were all sorts of issues with the picture. So it was shown theatrically in the 80s, didn't look that good. And then it was certain filmmakers, and in particular it was, what are the names? Robert Harris and Jim Katz. They restored the film in the 90s. Apparently it cost Universal $1 million to restore the film. But without their work in the 90s, we probably wouldn't have...
That's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. We wouldn't have the film looking as good as it does today if they didn't put that work in the 90s.
Yeah, I was just pulled that up while you were saying, it looks like 1996, restored and re-released exhibited for the first time in 70 millimeter. They had Kim Novak and Patricia Hitchcock there for the re-release. It was all remixed with surround sound. They did a ton of color correction because of that fading. So yeah, see, it's kind of crazy. And that's what scares me about movies that come out now. Like we talked about what's going to be that movie in 20 years. And it's like some of these are just sitting on a hard drive somewhere. And it's like, what if that gets lost or, and nobody's paying attention because it didn't do well on release? Yeah, you could almost lose movies like this forever, or at least to the level that you'd want to see them. Restoration is such an important part of this whole industry that I don't think people realize.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's crazy.
Because Robert Harris, who restored Vertigo, in the 90s, they also restored Kubrick's Spartacus and My Fair Lady, which, for my money, those two films are two of the best looking older films on 4K because they did such great work in the 90s that laid the foundation. So yeah, restoration is just hugely important.
Huge. Yeah, well, speaking of restoration in 4K and where people can buy it, I always like to end the episode. We'll talk, where can you actually watch this movie, which is always sometimes a fun game to play in 2024 because it's not always easy to find. I was shocked when I did the episode for Jaws, and I was like, oh, that's like not available on a streaming platform. Like not easy, like one of these top, 10 movies of all time, not available just with a subscription. And so funny I say that because I'm pulling up Vertigo and it looks like it's the same way. No, at least in the US. Now, I don't know if you have something in the UK where you can watch this more easily, but in the US, it looks like your only option is to buy or rent through an Apple TV, Amazon Vudu. Not actually available on any of your popular, your Netflixes, any of those streaming services, which is wild.
That is crazy. I'm just checking now, actually. So we do have one place to stream it for free. You can stream it on ITV, which is one of our TV channels here. They have a free streaming platform, so you can watch it on there. But yeah, aside from that, it's not available anywhere else. Yeah,
not widely available at all, which is so funny. It's a film of this caliber, and obviously now it's not 1958. I think everybody appreciates this movie a lot more. Well, so I guess, yeah, you can rent it by ITV is in the UK. I saw that's about it.
Yeah. And what that says to me is that it's really hard for new people to discover this film. If you've not heard about it, you're not going to randomly stumble across it on Netflix because it's not on there.
Exactly. And that's, I did a video the other day talking about the way the algorithms work. And I mean, the thing is, even if it was on Netflix, what are the chances they'd actually recommend it to you?
No, they
versus,
wouldn't push it at all.
Their originals or right. And that's why I think it's being able to browse a library of curated stuff at a video store or talk to people online about things that they love. Being tied into physical media is huge. And I guess that's probably, it looks like the best way to watch Vertigo, which is typically the case. It's usually the best way to watch is on physical, but in the US, we had a couple options. I believe it has a standalone 4K release now that you can get, but it was also part of the initial Alfred Hitchcock Classics collection, which if you just want to dive into Hitchcock, they're all in 4K, and that's a pretty good start. I think it's Psycho, The Birds, Vertigo, and maybe Rear Window. Do you have it? I'm doing this from memory. What are the four that are in there?
Rear Window, Vertigo, Psycho, The Birds. So yeah.
Oh, I nailed it. Yeah, a great set to obviously to start with. Now there have been 3, 4 that have been released with all a lot of deeper cuts.
There's been 3 which covers now all of the Universal Hitchcock titles.
Mhm.
So now that there's been 3, they're obviously going to release a big box set with them all, because why not?
Right. Of course. But yeah, I think that's probably the best. Even in the UK, are there any other releases where Vertigo got picked up, or is that pretty much the best option?
I think this is the best option. Yeah, I think we did have a steelbook that was exclusive with the 4K disc inside, but I think that's it. Yeah, get the box set, and it's regularly reduced now.
Oh, definitely.
Get it for a good price.
Yeah, I want to say I saw it for, and this is like on your Black Fridays or your Prime days or whatever. Even on, well, you can get it from Groove.com if you're in North America, which also will give you some pretty good deals and has a coupon for new users. But I want to say I've seen it like $30 to $35, maybe even cheaper on sales, which is, come on, for Psycho, The Birds, Rear Window, and Vertigo, all on 4K, and they're all really, really well done restorations. That's crazy. $6-7 a movie. That's about the best deal you can probably get on a 4-movie box set.
Yeah, and it's in my opinion, it's essential stuff for like any movie fan.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's, even if you don't want to go into volume 2 and volume 3 of Hitchcock, if you just want to scratch the surface, I mean, that's where to start, is with those 4. And then I think once you watch those, you'll probably want to buy more anyway. So good intro. That's film school in a box right there. So before we end things, we always pull some fun facts. Now, I'll let you go first. I have a couple, but if you have a fun fact, little trivia piece about Vertigo, I'd love to hear it.
I'm trying to think. I don't know if I've got any fun facts, actually. Something I do
Putting you on
know,
the spot.
One thing that I do know, which I've not checked out, there was some weird PlayStation game that was based on Vertigo, wasn't there? A couple of years ago. I think it's like a point and click animation thing. Yeah, look it up. I think it's called Vertigo, and it's like based on Hitchcock, but I have no idea how it plays or anything.
Okay. I see it here. Yeah, Alfred Hitchcock Vertigo is an adventure video game developed by the Spanish company Pendulo Studios, loosely based on the films of Hitchcock, including Vertigo. So I guess it's like even a bigger Hitchcock universe game.
Yeah.
That is wild. I did not know about that. Yeah, it is like a point and click, huh.
So that's my weird trivia.
Wow. I don't know. I don't know if that would be any good. Now you've got me curious. I'm going to have to watch some videos of people playing it and see what it's all about. My fun trivia here, and I don't know these off the top of my head, so props to you for pulling off the top of your head. I always go and look them up for most stuff, because IMDb, this is what I do when I watch a movie. I don't know, this is some part of my movie watching OCD, is right when I finish, I jump to IMDb and I read all of the trivia and all the spoiler trivia and the production notes and everything. I just dive deep. But right off the top here, and I did not know this, but the opening title sequence of Vertigo, which was designed by Saul Bass, who we talked about, it made it the first movie that ever used computer graphics.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know it was done on a computer.
Never been done before. Yeah, apparently Saul Bass made this with computers in it would have been done in probably 57. That's early stuff. So I had no idea. I assumed that was hand done.
Yeah, because I didn't even think computers were like widely accessible for creative stuff at that point.
No, I didn't. I mean, hey, there's a chance that this could be wrong, but that's what they're saying, and it's the top rated. Yeah, graphic designer, all animated with all the spirals and everything was computer animated, CGI.
Does it say he did it in Photoshop? Because then we don't believe it.
Then we know it's a time travel movie if he did it in Photoshop. Now we know it's based on real life experiences. No, that's crazy. I'm actually shocked. And the other thing, which I think is interesting, is that it's the only one of Hitchcock's movies in which the killer is not punished.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I would not have guessed. I guess that is just the case for every other Hitchcock movie. The killer gets their day, but not in this one.
It's funny you mention that, because the film had an alternate ending, which was filmed, and it's on the 4K disc, where at the start of the film, where he's approached by the guy who wants him to follow his wife around, and it turns out she was killed. There's an ending that was recorded where James Stewart and Barbara Bel Geddes are talking, and they're talking about how he's going to be captured and he's going to go to prison for what he did. So that was filmed for an international audience, and then it was scrapped because it kind of didn't really fit the theme of the film.
Yeah, it's interesting. It says, there's some notes here. It said there was an ending in which Scotty and Midge hear news over the radio of Gavin Elster being sought by the police, which was filmed at the demands of the American Production Code Administration. I don't know what that is. Some kind of censorship board?
Yeah.
Like you weren't allowed to let a killer get away with it? That's what it looks like. Some sort of strict Catholic moralist who set up a production code. Interesting. But they ended up just not using it anyway.
It'll be one of those crazy things where they thought that people would go and see the movie and think that that guy was out there and would come and kill him. Kind of thing. Right. That is interesting, though. The only one. Like, I wonder why every movie you kind of have that resolution, and he filmed it and then cut it. It's interesting. I guess, I mean, it keeps it a little more open-ended, mysterious, kind of plays in with the rest of the film, I think. It's a little bit different from what he was, used to making. I think it was a good decision, personally, but it's interesting. Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, there were some fun facts, and that was Vertigo. So any last minute thoughts, anything you wanted to make sure we got in on, one of your top 4 movies here? I don't want to do it disservice. You picked this one. So if I missed anything, let me know. I'll give you a last chance here before we close up.
No, the one thing is just go and watch it. And if you watched it and you were kind of sort of liked it, maybe give it another shot, because that's how I was when I first saw it. And then it really worked for me on the second viewing.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think I probably started and stopped. One of those, like, I'm going to watch this, and I get into it and get distracted. And when I finally sat down and watched it, and it was mostly because the disc came out, and I was like, well, now's the perfect time. Yeah, well worth it. So not easily available to watch, apparently, as we learned. But if you could also buy it on DVD or Blu-ray, any format. It's widely available in a physical format, just I guess not on streaming, but you can also rent it or buy it digitally. Find a way to watch it, though. It's definitely one of those, it's like a bucket list movie.
Or you can play it on PlayStation, whatever you want.
That's true. Yeah, if you just want to live it, then the game is $20 in the PlayStation store right now. And boy, I feel like you'd be taking a risk with that $20, but I guess there's worse ways to spend $20. So if anybody does play it, please let me know, because I'm very curious. But anyways, thank you, Elliot. It's been great. As always, thank you for all the insight. I just learned a lot because, like I said, I've only watched this a couple of times. So you just gave me a little masterclass on Hitchcock and Vertigo, which I appreciate. That's part of the fun of doing these podcasts. So thank you. Thank you for coming on.
No, thank you very much for having me. And I'm sorry if I went on and ranting too much about certain aspects of the film.
Nope. That's what this is. Hey, trust me, when I have to do it by myself and I'm talking for 40, 45 minutes, it's a lot of ranting and just kind of dumping thoughts out there. So I actually liked being able to talk to somebody else this time and listen to them. So this is great. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll have to do some more soon. Pick a couple more movies, do a couple more of these. But yeah, guys, that's it for today. So thanks for watching, listening. This was House of 1,000 Movies. Elliot Coen's here. Make sure you check out his YouTube channel. I'll put all those links in the episode description. So go check out his stuff. He does deep dives into a lot of films that honestly I've never heard of. I learn a lot of stuff from you. So I know it's a great resource and you guys should all go check it out. But yeah, thanks again and we'll talk soon. Hey there, movie buff. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of House of 1,000 Movies. I hope you had as much fun listening as I did discussing some of my favorite films. Don't forget, if you're into video podcasts, you can head over to the YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button. If you're already on YouTube, it's right there, so why not hit it? And for our audio listeners, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. If you've been enjoying the show, why not show me some love by leaving a 5-star review? It really helps me out and it lets me know that I'm hitting the mark. And hey, before you go, a quick shout out to our sponsors. By supporting them, you're not just supporting the show, but also the content you love. Thanks again for joining me in the House of 1,000 Movies. Until next time, keep watching, keep listening, and keep watching great movies. Take care, everyone.